Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 17 Reviewed. Last time out I found Season 16 to be quite enjoyable actually, so let's hope this one continues in that same vein. In terms of the staff for this season, a few new writers were brought in, including one who had previously worked on The Critic and Futurama, and Al Jean is of course still the showrunner. This season I don't actually remember that much of, to be honest. I have still seen most of the episodes from this season, but there are a few that I don't really remember much of, so my knowledge of this season isn't as good as most of the previous ones. So I am kind of interested to see how this season plays out, to be honest. As ever, I would like to say a thank you to The Simpsons Wiki for its valuable information, and with that said, let's move into the episodes. Season 17, Episode 1, The Bonfire of the Manatees. In order to pay off his debts to Fat Tony, Homer lets him shoot a porno film in the house. When Marge finds out, she dries off, and ends up meeting a marine biologist. So some trivia here is that Carl mentions a film called Fahrenheit 9/1. This is a reference to the film and novel Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore. And my best moment was Mr. Burns and Smithers rehydrating the manatee. The season premiere gets a 2 out of 5. This plot feels very recycled. Now, whether it actually is or not, I don't really know, but it sure does feel like it. That is because it reuses so many of the typical tired story beats that we always see in Homer and Marge's marriage crisis episodes. Homer does something stupid, which Marge gets mad about, and it results in one of them moving out for the remainder of the episode. Then in the final scene, Homer wins Marge back in what is often a very uninspiring and unconvincing way. This episode is basically exactly that. There is no point going into more detail as I could literally copy and paste a review from about a dozen previous plots like this, and it would work just as well. The only decent thing here is that the guy that Marge was spending time with did not actually want any kind of relationship with her. That at least stopped this from being over dramatic. So, as I was uninvested in the plot, the jokes would have to be real good to save the episode, and sadly they were not. Most of the episode is boring. There were only two things I found somewhat funny. One was Homer claiming that Marge died from a falling air conditioner, and that it was not all bad because as part of the settlement her funeral was air conditioned. The second thing was the ending scene, of Burns and Smithers with the manatee that was posing as Homer. I liked how happy all three were with what was going on, and with the car wash song playing in the background, it was just a light-hearted moment to end on. Still, a few decent moments does not a good episode make. Season 17, Episode 2, The Girl Who Slept Too Little. The Simpsons stop a new stamp museum from being built behind their house. However, the Springfield Cemetery is moved there instead. It turns out that only Lisa's bedroom faces it. So my trivia for this one is that the song that plays during the protest of the Stamp Museum is Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire. And the best bit of this episode for me was just the character of Gravedigger Billy. I just find him to be an interesting one-off character that fits the tone of the episode well. This episode gets a 5 out of 5. I found that this episode just had a very engaging plot that had quite a few things going for it. It seems simple on paper. The cemetery somehow moves next to the Simpsons' house, which causes Lisa to get scared. The episode just capitalizes on that premise and the setting of the graveyard so well though. And it is just the general tone here which really won me over and pushed this to a 5. There is kind of an edge here which is very rarely seen on this show. I mean, you have Gravedigger Billy burying people alive and trying to kill Willie. You have Dr. Nick stealing body parts from graves. Then there is Wiggum getting scared and stripping naked in the middle of the cemetery. If this stuff sounds bizarre to you, that is because it is. But as I said, it just fits the episode so well. I haven't even mentioned Lisa trying to spend the night in the cemetery. After getting spooked, she knocks her head on a gravestone and ends up having this surreal nightmare/dream while she's knocked unconscious in the middle of the graveyard. This is definitely one of the more dark and creepy episodes of the show in my opinion. And I mean that as a compliment, as that is obviously what the writers were going for. The story even has a meaningful conclusion, as Lisa learns that it is okay for her to get scared, as everyone does, no matter how tough or smart they are. The story and tone is not all the episode does right. It also has some fine comedy. I liked Homer's antics in protesting the Stamping Museum, such as Homer accidentally giving away his PIN number, and of course jiggling for justice, as well as him bizarrely revealing that Bart has a new race car bed and its brakes have been cut. Lisa's line about Scooby-Doo teaching her that the only people to be afraid of are crooked real estate developers, that also kind of hit home for me. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It may not have a single all-time great moment, but it does have a lot of good moments, as well as a tone which feels quite unique for this series. Season 17, Episode 3, Millhouse of Sand and Fog. Kirk and Luann Van Houten get back together. At first, Millhouse is thrilled. However, he soon realizes they're more interested in each other than him, so he and Bart plan to break them up. So the title here is a parody of the 2003 drama movie House of Sand and Fog, and my best moment was the dream that Millhouse has. This episode is a 2 out of 5. So yes, this episode has Kirk and Luann getting back together, which I don't mind to be honest. They broke up in season 8 and Millhouse divided, so we got a good 9 seasons of them not together, and I actually can't remember what the show does with that couple going forward, so I'm interested to find out as we move on. The stuff with Millhouse here was also decent. It was of course understandable that his parents reconciling would make him happy, even if Millhouse does predictably go over the top about it like he always does. As I mentioned, I did like that little fantasy sequence that he has though, and the fact that he wakes up from it in the back of an ambulance. Once Act 3 comes around though, this goes from an average episode to a poor one. For some reason Bart has this genius idea to break Kirk and Luann up by planting a bra, but the bra only succeeds in breaking Homer and Marge up. So you guessed it, we have yet another Homer and Marge marriage crisis on our hands. I mean, I am seriously starting to get annoyed with this now. It is just Groundhog Day with this plotline. We got loads of it last season. Now 2 of the first 3 episodes of this one have it as a major part. If we continue to get more of this, then these reviews will start becoming real short, because I simply don't have much left to say about them. Oh, and the episode was not particularly funny either, which certainly doesn't help my mood. Season 17, Episode 4, Treehouse of Horror 16. The 3 short stories this year are BI, Artificial Intelligence, Survival of the Fattest, and I've Grown a Costume on Your Face. And a bit of information about this one is that Kang and Kodos wonder if speeding up time will allow the Chicago Cubs to win the World Series. This was a reference to the team's long-standing championship drought, and they ended that drought when they won it in 2016. And the best thing here for me was the townspeople being turned into their costumes. This year's Halloween special gets a 3 out of 5. The first part was somewhat interesting. Just seeing how Bart reacted to being replaced by a robot was pretty funny. I love how he takes revenge by turning himself into a robot in order to destroy his replacement. The robot kid saying, "To get me, you have to go through your father," right before Bart slices through both of them was pretty funny. Other than that one moment though, this was a bit short on laughs, but it still works in the main. Part 2 was very simple. I mean, why not use a segment as an excuse to have Mr. Burns shoot as many people as possible? You can tell that this era of the show was when a death counter really started going up in these Treehouse of Horrors. Despite the sheer simplicity of the violence though, it did have some amusing parts, like the blue-haired lawyer drawing up a defense for Burns right before getting killed by him. Also, for what it was, I actually liked the sports-style commentary over the killings. "That is a type of showboating that will turn people off this sport," he says as Burns continues to shoot Krusty. Part 3 maybe was the best of them all, just because of the premise. Everyone getting turned into their Halloween costumes for real was a clever idea. Now it has been done before in other shows I think, but still, I'm not against seeing it again. It managed to give life to a few good moments, such as Nelson being mistaken for a raccoon, and Mole Man being turned into a mole despite not even wearing a costume. Still though, while it was initially interesting, they actually never ended up doing that much with most of the characters. Now it is probably due to the time constraints, but still, I felt this part could have been even better. That kind of sums this episode up as a whole really. It is okay, and has some good moments, but still leaves me wanting more. Season 17, Episode 5, Marge's Sun Poisoning. After Homer refuses to ride a tandem bike with Marge, she gets Bart to instead. At first they enjoy spending time together, but Bart gets frustrated when others call him a mama's boy. So at numerous points in this episode, Marge and Bart sing the song Sweet Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner. My best moment was Marge and Bart biking together. Marge and Bart hanging out gets a 3 out of 5. The story concept here was solid enough. We don't get to see Marge and Bart centric episodes very often, so in that sense this was a nice surprise. They do always have a good connection, and it was just very pleasant viewing, watching them bike riding and drinking tea together. The conflict here is rather predictable, with Bart being considered a mummy's boy. Of course he ends up upsetting Marge by trying to disprove that. He then feels sorry for her for the second time in the episode, and offers to sing with her at a school karaoke night. All this was a bit sappy at times, with all of the sad looks from Bart and Marge, but the ending decides to go in the other direction. After seeing how Skinner is still so hooked to his mother, Marge understandably doesn't want her relationship with Bart to go that way, so she gives Bart permission to cause some havoc, which he does in a decent way. The Homer and Moe arm wrestling subplot was not particularly good though. It kinda feels like a poor rendition of the boxing story in The Homer They Fall. They try to connect it to the main plot, but it is in such a threadbare way that I just don't care. They might as well have not bothered. In addition to the subplot, the other thing which holds this back is the lackluster jokes. Not enough of them landed for me, and as a result the episode became a tad boring at times. The only thing I found a bit funny was Marge asking Homer how his new arm wrestling career will affect his job at the plant. To which Homer replies, negatively I assume. It's just the laid back way in which he said it which makes it work for me. Season 17, Episode 6. See Homer Run. Homer becomes the school's safety salamander in an effort to try and win back Lisa's trust in him. After he saves many drivers from a car pile-up, he decides to run for mayor. So the title of this episode is a play on a movie about Arnold Schwarzenegger's run for California governor, which was called See Arnold Run, and my best moment was the debate between the candidates for mayor. This one is a 2 out of 5. I remembered this episode being much better than it actually was. I think that is just because Homer in the safety salamander suit is a somewhat memorable image. Sadly though, most of its plot just did not click with me. It was mostly about Homer trying to win back Lisa's love after he upset her. I just don't think that angle was handled particularly well. I mean sure, Homer was slightly insensitive to her Father's Day present, but that is the only thing he did wrong here. And Lisa herself was a bit self-righteous at times as well. So much so that it actually left me wondering, why is Homer trying so much to make this minor thing up to her anyway? As this was my opinion of the story, the attempt at a sweet ending never really convinced me, and the whole thing felt a bit forced. This episode, like much of this season so far, had mediocre jokes. I just never found myself smiling here, never mind laughing. Maybe more time should have been devoted to Homer's mayor run, as that whole section was by far the best bit of the episode. It was funny to see all of the wacky folks of Springfield try and run for mayor, and it was just a good bit of satire about how elections and debates work in general. If that story lasted for maybe 10 minutes instead of the 3 minutes that it got, then this episode would have likely been better. Season 17, Episode 7. The Last of the Red Hat Mamas. Marge joins a group called the Cherry Red Tomatoes. Meanwhile, Lisa needs to learn Italian, and the only tutor she can find is Milhouse. So my trivia here is that when Homer pulls out the folder, mansion is spelled M-A-N-S-O-N instead of M-A-N-S-O-I-N. Also, the blueprint on the wall during the planning of the heist has B-W-R-N-S written instead of Burns. Now whether these were just mistakes or intentional by the writers, I don't know. And my best moment was Milhouse teaching Lisa Italian. This episode gets a 2 out of 5. To me, this episode felt like a bunch of previous plots mixed together in an attempt to create a new one. And as the rating suggests, I did not enjoy it. Marge trying to fit in with some new friends is of course a scenes from a class struggle in Springfield type of plot, and because of that it did have potential. Sadly though, I did not really buy any kind of real bond between Marge and her new group of friends. I mean, any group that has Agnes in it is not to be trusted really. This is only proven true by the scheme to steal from Mr. Burns, which seems to come out of nowhere. Also, why would Marge be peer pressured into doing this? She knows firsthand the consequences of pulling a heist on Burns because of Homer's mother. The ending to this story was also a damp squib. Burns catches them and lets them go anyway. That made no sense and was totally out of character for him. As I said, the subplot of Milhouse teaching Lisa Italian works better. Milhouse actually wasn't too much of a dork here for a change. and it is cool to see that he is well known within this secret Italian community in Springfield. Of course he blows his chances with Lisa in the end though by getting too cocky, but at least he had his moment. The jokes here were again not to my taste though. The constant ones about Mayor Quimby's infidelity got old fast, and Sherry and Terry speaking this supposed twin language was just stupid. The bad moments just outnumber the good moments here, which is why it gets a 2. But Lisa's newly learned Italian could hopefully come in useful in this next episode because it is Season 17, Episode 8, The Italian Bob. Mr. Burns sends Homer and family to Italy to pick up a sports car. While there, they run into Sideshow Bob, who is living there with his new family. My trivia for this one is that Buzz Lightyear from the Toy Story franchise is mentioned by Lisa when she points out his voice actor. Coincidentally, of course, Kelsey Grammer was the voice of Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2. And my best moment was The Book of American Criminals. This episode gets another 2 out of 5. This one is a bit of a polarizing episode amongst fans of the show. Some really hate it, but others do manage to get some enjoyment out of it. I fall more into the former category. The first third of this episode is purely The Simpsons messing about in Italy. I found all of that stuff boring to be honest, and it kind of left the episode with a lot to do if it wanted to win me back over. The Bob reveal comes out of nowhere, and because of that, I think it kind of works. I imagine it would be a genuine surprise if you didn't know what was coming. The reveal that he now has a new wife and kid is also interesting, even if they never ended up putting them to any great use in the future. I do think that the second act contained the best parts of the episode, just because we got to see the Simpsons family hang out with Bob's family a bit. The way Bob gets ousted as a criminal was kind of dumb though. Sure, a drunk Lisa spilling the beans was fine, but why on earth was Bob still wearing his prison uniform under his clothes? That was just stupid. The third act was just very out there. First, Bob chases the family, which leads to them losing the car. Then, they end up in a play being done by Krusty. It was all a bit silly, and not silly in a good way either. Once again, the jokes are not great here. I mean, the rake gag making a comeback was okay I suppose. And I did kind of like the plagiarism gag at Family Guy and American Dad's expense. Still though, even that had been done better before, in the Treehouse of Horror clone episode. This is probably the worst Sideshow Bob episode so far, which is a little sad to be honest. Season 17, Episode 9, Simpsons Christmas Stories. When Reverend Lovejoy can't attend a Christmas sermon, Homer takes over by telling 3 Christmas-related tales. So, when this episode was aired in Australia, it had a parental advisory for adult themes. My best moment here was the Nutcracker song. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So this is another anthology episode, and this time it's based around Christmas. Part 1 was simple enough, but there was a few good moments. I liked Homer's line, "That's not the only thing she's got in her," about Marge. Also Bart as baby Jesus was kind of cute actually, and him being amused by Homer's antics was a good excuse for some slapstick comedy. Part 2 was the weakest of the 3 in my opinion. I was not that invested in Grandpa and Burns being trapped on his island, and the whole Santa Claus ending was kind of odd. Speaking of odd, apparently Grandpa and Burns were spooning with each other. Fair enough, nothing to say about that. The last part was perhaps the best of the 3, just beating out the first. I enjoyed the song that the town sings. It has some clever lyrics and some good sequences to go along with it too. Sure, the joke about Moe trying to kill himself was a bit overdone, but still, the ending mostly makes up for that. I love how Marge knew that Homer would forget to buy her a present, so she buys one for him to give her instead. The fact that the present is a picture of them together makes the moment even better. Overall, I enjoyed this 3-parter more than most of the previous ones. Sure, it's not that funny overall, but it still has a few good moments, and manages to have a bit of charm to it. Season 17, Episode 10, Homer's Paternity Coot. After a frozen mailman from the 60s is discovered, the Simpsons receive a letter from Mona. It suggests Abe is not Homer's father, so Homer goes on a quest to find his true father. My trivia for this one is that actor Michael York guest stars as Homer's potential new father, Mason Fairbanks. And my best moment was Marge trying to avoid paying a toll. Homer's daddy issues get a 3 out of 5. Act 1 here was decent. The opening scenes of Marge trying to get out of paying a new toll road was good. mainly just because of the ridiculous lengths that the local government go to just to try and make some extra money. That is just realistic, to be honest. The core of the story here, I think, was actually quite good, and there were some good characterizations for all of the characters. It is understandable how Homer would be conflicted hearing that Abe is not his real father, and the way in which the family's relationship with Abe is awkward after the news is very realistic. Now I have to say that I don't remember seeing this episode before, so because of that I was genuinely intrigued to see how all of this was resolved in the end, and I have to say that I was a bit disappointed. The twist, that Abe actually swapped the labels on the test speakers and was Homer's real father all along, I also don't really buy his reasoning for doing it. Sure, we have a somewhat happy ending, and the status quo was never truly going to be changed, but still, the fact that there was no real foreshadowing to the twist, along with the fact that it didn't make sense, soured what, up until that point, had been a solid enough plot. Aside from the intro scenes with the toll road, other good moments in the episode include Homer's annoyed reaction to Abe, telling him that he is his real father, as well as Abe replying, "You would have guessed wrong," to Lisa when she says, "I would have guessed the fan was on low." In the end, this is just a middle of the road episode, and as such, is perfect for a 3 rating. Season 17, Episode 11. We're on the road to nowhere. When Bart damages the school with steam, Principal Skinner sends him to a camp in Oregon. Homer has to drive him there. Meanwhile, Marge and Lisa decide to have a yard sale. So my trivia for this one is that in Homer's fantasy, serious Homer is dressed in Homer's conductor uniform from Marge vs. the Monorail. The best bit here for me was Ned buying back his LP of Dreamcoat. This episode got a 3 out of 5 from me. I found this episode took a while to get going, as I did not find Bart's steam prank at the school that fun. Once Homer sets off to take him to camp though, things do pick up. Bart is banned from flying, so Homer has to drive him across the country instead of going to Vegas with his friends. This obviously annoys him, and it leads to some decent back and forth between him and Bart throughout the episode. I especially like the scene at the diner before Bart runs away. Homer does manage to drop Bart off at the camp in the end, only to regret it straight away, and he ends up taking Bart to Vegas with him instead. The small side plot of Marge's yard sale also worked for me. I like how Flanders was buying back all of his stuff. That long gag where he sings the Dreamcoat song I personally found funny. Sure, it probably does go on too long in a very Family Guy type of way, but still, something about Ned singing it so enthusiastically just gets me. The ending to the side plot also lines up to the main one in an interesting way. Marge gets done for drug dealing after selling Homer's old pills, and we learn that Bart and Homer have got into trouble in Vegas, so they are also in jail. This leads to Lisa declaring that it is just her and Maggie now, and that she will look for work in the morning. On one hand, this is an inconclusive ending, and it does kind of smack of the writers running out of time. Still though, if executed well enough, endings like this can work for the sake of comedy, and I think this one was good enough for me to give it a pass. Overall, this was an up and down episode, but it definitely did have its merits. Season 17, Episode 12, My Fair Laddie. After Bart accidentally destroys Groundskeeper Willie's shack, the Simpsons take him in. Lisa plans to make Willie into a proper gentleman as a project for the school science fair. So the title and indeed the whole episode here is a take on a 1964 musical film, My Fair Lady. And my best moment here was Groundskeeper Willie's Adequate song. So did I find this episode adequate? Yes, I did. I gave it a 4 out of 5. And yes, this episode was kind of a musical. I say kind of because the musical numbers here don't actually take up too much time. Most of the runtime is dedicated to Lisa trying to teach Willie how to become a gentleman, as well as how he reacts to this new lifestyle. I think most of this stuff worked. Willie has been a somewhat important character on the show for a while now, but he has never really had an episode which touches heavily on his backstory. It is good to see that he is capable of turning his life around if he wants to, but as the ending shows, he just does not really want to. Now I may normally get annoyed at an ending like this for going completely back to normal, but here I find it more believable that Willie reverted back to type. The ending where he is happy in his new shack is nice to see, and I even kind of like that he destroyed Lisa's new Home Sweet Home picture. It just confirms that the old version of him is well and truly back. In terms of the jokes here, they are not amazing, but in fairness, this episode did not really take a very gag-heavy approach. I did like Martin's device that measures surprise, and as I said, some of Willie's songs were more than adequate. Homer's small side plot about advertising for blue pants was not particularly good though, which means that this episode only just gets a 4. Season 17, Episode 13, The Seemingly Never-Ending Story. While on a family outing to a cave, Homer ends up stuck in a hole. While Marge, Bart, and Maggie look for a way out, Lisa stays behind and tells Homer a long-winded story. The trivia here is that Rich Uncle Pennybags, the mascot of the game Monopoly, was a member in the Rich Club that Mr. Burns was in. My best moment here was just the general flow of the episode. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. So this is a bit of an experiment from the writers. It is kind of like 22 short films about Springfield, the flashback edition. Even though this is full of numerous flashbacks, and there are numerous plot points, it is still easy enough to follow. All of the stories revolve around the bag of gold, and how Snake, Moe, the rich Texan, and Mr. Burns all want to get it back. The Burns story I found most interesting. I like how he has this over-the-top scavenger hunt with the rich Texan, and that is how he lost the plant. As a result, he had to work his way back up, starting at Moe's. The Moe and Edna couple I was not a big fan of though, I have to say. Something about them together just seems a bit off. Still though, it was cool to see how Edna got stuck teaching Bart. Well, cool, but also kind of sad, given how much passion she lost for the job in such a small space of time. The ending standoff was also decent. I like how Snake brought his kid to the cave who just chills with Bart playing video games. In terms of the jokes, they were not fantastic, which does stop this from being a 5, but there were still a few I liked, such as Barney reappearing in Moe's straight away after being chucked out, and Homer going to get a toupee after having his 2 hairs ripped out. So yeah, this was not the funniest episode ever, but when you combine a few good moments with a well constructed plot, you have an enjoyable episode on your hands. Season 17, Episode 14, Bart Has 2 Mummies. Marge babysits Rod and Todd, and tries to get them to come out of their shell. Meanwhile, Homer takes the kids to an animal shelter, where Bart is kidnapped by a monkey. My trivia for this one is that Homer thinks the title creatures from the film Gremlins will be at the animal retirement home. And the best bit about this episode for me was the ending. This one ended up being a 4 out of 5. The main parts of this episode I think they got right. That being the focus on Ned's boys, and how Marge tries to get them to come out of their shells a bit. I enjoyed that stuff. It is nice to see the boys have some genuine fun, and even stand up for themselves against Ned. I know they did try this angle a bit with Edna in the HD era, so I guess this is a bit of a precursor to that. The secondary plot, in which Bart gets kidnapped by an ape, is a bit wacky, but it was okay in all honesty. It kind of ties in thematically with the main story, and even links up with the main story for the conclusion. I like how Rod uses his new climbing skills to save the day, and proving himself to Ned in the process. They even managed to get Mr. Tierney to his rightful mother. The plot overall does not go about things in a conventional way, but it still gets the job done regardless. The jokes were good overall too, which helps this to a 4. I like the duck race at the start. There were a few good lines from Ned, such as, "This is my favourite kind of surprise, mild." I also like the dictionaries that Marge and Ned use to understand each other. The ending joke of Bart telling Rod the wrong meaning of the word gay also provides an amusing moment, and Marge has to awkwardly try and explain it away to an unimpressed Ned. All in all, this was a fun episode, with some rare character moments for Rod and Todd. Season 17, Episode 15, Homer Simpson, This Is Your Wife. Homer puts himself and Marge in a TV show in which 2 families swap mothers. Homer and the kids get a very strict woman, while Marge stays with a man named Charles. So, some information about this one is that as well as guest starring in it, Ricky Gervais also helped to write this episode, and my best moment was the genie joke. This episode gets a 3 out of 5 from me. This was a tough episode to wrap my head around, to be honest, and a really hard one to review. There were parts of it I liked, but in other areas I think it fell flat. To start off, I will go with the intro scene of Homer staying at Lenny's house at days on end to watch a plasma screen TV. I did like most of those scenes, and it does set up Homer's drive to buy one for himself, which is a reason why he signs up to the reality show. Since when did Lenny live in a nice apartment like that though? In terms of the main part of the episode, I will start with the positives first. I think Ricky gave a solid performance here, and if you are familiar with his dry type of humour, then this episode definitely fits into that mould. Now, I'm not necessarily the biggest Gervais fan in the world, but he is of course good at line delivery and comedic timing, which does work well in a show like The Simpsons. The funniest moment was the gag about the genie giving double to the husband's wife. I love how Marge was happy at first, but was so disgusted when the punchline was beat me half to death. In fact, Marge being oblivious to most of what was going on was perhaps the best bit of the character stuff here. It's like she is so pure that she can't grasp how openly cynical this Charles guy is. That is probably some difference between the UK and US attitude right there, if I really want to dig deep into it. The Homer stuff with his wife I liked less though. I found all of those scenes to be boring, and they made the episode drag quite a bit. Also, the ending was kind of anticlimactic, with the wife just going off with Patty. I expected there to be more fallout to Charles' story. So yeah, a really hard one to rate, but it did just about as much right as it did wrong, and as such gets a 3. Season 17, Episode 16, $1 Million AB. After Abe ruins the town's chance to have a football team, the townspeople start hating him. It gets to the point where he attempts suicide, but he manages to find acceptance, being a matador at the new football stadium. So the song that plays when Grandpa walks around Springfield is Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out by John Lennon. And my best moment was Homer creating a new football team. This episode is a 1 out of 5. I'm sorry, but I hated this episode. The opening few minutes with Homer trying to create a new football team for Springfield was the best thing here. At least that required a tiny bit of creativity. Once we get into the town hating Abe, things go downhill. If you are going to do a story about him being depressed enough to try and kill himself, you need to make it a bit more convincing than this. No one cared about him at all, and the way in which his life was saved was kind of dumb. Then you have what is a strong contender for the most ridiculous third act pivot in the show's history. I mean, how do we get from Abe surviving his suicide attempt to him becoming a bull matador? That plotline came from absolutely nowhere. It is the kind of thing you would expect the manatees of South Park to come up with for Family Guy. As if this nonsensical plot wasn't enough, they actually tried to put some emotion into it with Grandpa and Lisa. Sadly though, it was just never given enough time to get me to care about it. And because of that, Lisa's line of, "I always cheered for you, Grandpa, until now," that just struck me as sappy and manipulative writing. I mean, we all know that the family, Lisa included, spend a lot of the time neglecting Abe, so forgive me if I don't really get the emotional impact of this. To go along with the nonsense plot, once again I found the jokes lacking here, which puts the final nail in this episode's coffin. Season 17, Episode 17, Kiss Kiss Bang Bangalore. Mr. Burns moves the power plant to India and picks Homer to manage it. Meanwhile, Patty and Selma meet their Hollywood heartthrob, MacGyver. So my trivia for this one is that the song that plays as the Simpsons sail through India is The End by The Doors, and it was previously used in Season 11 episode Hello Gutter, Hello Fudder. My best moment here was Richard Dean Anderson escaping from Patty and Selma like MacGyver. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So the main plot here was just okay. Some things worked, like Homer's godlike power trip, and the confident yet deluded demeanour that Mr. Burns has. However, it also fell flat in a few areas. For example, the Indian culture jokes were mostly just boiled down to cheap gags and stereotypes. Also, in an episode which is largely about outsourcing American jobs overseas, I would expect some satire to be thrown in along the way. There wasn't really any here though, or if there was any, it lacked bite so much that I couldn't even detect it. I found the side plot to be more consistently engaging than the main one. I liked the idea of Patty and Selma meeting their real-life MacGyver, and they make use of the guest star quite well. At first he shuns his old role, but when they kidnap him he finds the thrill out of escaping them. It was cool to see his methods of escape, and how by the end of it Patty and Selma just wanted him to go. The jokes were only average here, but this episode did not rely on them too much. It instead had some interesting situations, and a very good subplot to carry it. Season 17, Episode 18, The Wettest Stories Ever Told. While waiting for dinner at the Frying Dutchman, the Simpsons decide to pass time by telling stories of 3 famous ships. My trivia here is that Comic Book Guy's inspirational music is Alone Again Naturally by Gilbert O'Sullivan. And my best moment was how Homer and Bart's stories blended at the end. This episode is a 1 out of 5. So not only is this the second non-Treehouse of Horror 3-parter in the season, I also think this is the worst one of Lee's so far. And that is saying something, given that I'm not really a big fan of them in general. I really hope 2 of Lee's every season is not a pattern that we see going forward. I'm not even bothering to go into detail about the individual parts here, as they were all quite boring. And to be honest, I forgot about them almost as soon as I finished watching them. They of course all involve characters on various ships, but I don't think they used that location to their advantage, and we got the same boring jokes over and over again. The ending bit of Bart's crew getting lost in Homer's story was a bit amusing, as I said, but that really is where the good bits begin and end. We never even got the bit with the family waiting for food at the Flying Dutchman resolved, which was a bit of a shame, as I actually found that more interesting than the stories. This is not like other 1-rated episodes, where I have a lot of awful stuff to criticise. This was just boring from start to finish. Just one of the most dull episodes so far. Season 17, Episode 19. Girls Just Want to Have Sums. After Principal Skinner is fired for making a sexist remark, the school is divided into boys and girls. However, the math class for girls doesn't teach real math, so Lisa disguises herself as a boy to infiltrate their math class. The trivia here is that the Broadway musical Spamalot, which Hank Azaria stars in, was parodied in this episode, and my best moment was Principal Skinner's speech. I gave this one a 5 out of 5. I did quite enjoy this episode, mostly for the thought-provoking story. There is a lot of good social commentary going on here about all kinds of things, from outrage mobs to feminism to education and the differences between boys and girls. Most of it is very good stuff, very well handled. In terms of Lisa, who is the main character here, I quite like how she was portrayed too. She just wants to be challenged in a real way and is quite happy to be wrong in order to get better. Humility is not usually one of Lisa's strong points, but she was quite humble here. She even learns a lesson in the end about being happy with who she is, without feeling the need to compare herself to boys. The jokes were not amazing, I would say, but they were still better than average by this season's standards. I liked Homer's line, "Why did women invent sleeping on the couch?" after an argument with Marge. I also found the Itchy and Scratchy musical at the start to be very entertaining. As I said though, the best bits in this episode was Skinner desperately trying to pander to the outraged women. The way in which he ties himself in knots, trying not to offend people, is so apt. No matter whether he says that boys and girls are identical or different, they are never happy. This type of thing has aged really well, as is shown by all of these celebrities nowadays who come out with grovelling apologies for something offensive they may have said. My general advice to people in this situation would be that if you have an opinion, stick by it, and just don't apologise. For a start, apologies should be sincere, and you should only make them if you actually really mean it. It's not like you're going to win those type of people over by apologising to them anyway. If anything, you'll make them sniff blood and come after you even harder. Anyway, I got a bit sidetracked from the review by giving my own opinions there, but I hope I at least gave you guys some food for thought. As you can tell, this episode definitely gave me some. Season 17, Episode 20, Regarding Margie. When Marge bumps her head and loses her memory, she soon remembers everything again, except for one thing, Homer. So, if you were paying attention during the intro of this episode, you would have seen that the chalkboard gag says, "I will not leak the plot of the movie." This is a reference to the then upcoming Simpsons movie. The best bits here for me was Homer getting other people's mail. This episode is another 1 out of 5. So I found this episode to be a bit of a shocker, really. I mean, amnesia stories are not only very unoriginal, they rarely seem to be done well by any show which attempts them. It is a cheap way to create conflict and often serves as an excuse for the writers to do what they want with a character. Act 1 of this episode was very average, which actually makes it the best part of the episode. Homer getting other people's mail was okay, and the way he uses it to get free steaks, among other things, was pretty amusing. Once Marge bangs her head though and loses her memory, things never really recover. At first I thought it could be interesting, with it being Marge essentially seeing the town of Springfield for the first time again. That angle doesn't last long enough though, and she soon remembers everything about her life except for, of course, Homer. Not only does this develop into yet another Homer and Marge marriage crisis, it also involves a lot of unnecessary cruelty to Homer. He never even did anything bad here. If anything, he was very supportive of Marge while she was recovering. But still she ends up shunning him for no real reason. She says that forgetting about him was the best thing that ever happened to her, and she even dares to kick him out of the house. I mean, how that even works when it is Homer's house, and she does not even remember him is anyone's guess. Also, the payoff to all of this is so sudden, and in the grand scheme of things, irrelevant. Homer says some nice things about Marge, then voila, she remembers him again and they act like nothing ever happened. You just can't act like everything is okay again when you spent the entire episode showing how these characters, especially Marge, don't even care for each other. Just a very bad story all around. As much as I did dislike the story though, the jokes were just as big of a problem here. They were all very bland and on the nose, which meant that they did nothing to lighten the mood of this depressing story. This was just a scrambled mess of an episode. Season 17, Episode 21, The Monkey Suit. Ned Flanders and Reverend Lovejoy talk Principal Skinner into teaching creationism in schools. Soon, teaching evolution is banned entirely, which leads Lisa to start her own secret class. So my trivia here is that the scenes with Nelson removing a mask, leading to a kind of jigsaw puzzle fade, are parodies of the 1960s television series Mission Impossible, and my best moment was Homer acting like an ape in court, and you can see a demonstration of that right there. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. So I am guessing that this episode must have been very topical at the time. I know there was a big hubbubaloo about whether religion should be taught in schools or not. As for my opinion on that whole thing, I don't really have a strong one to be honest. Yes, religion probably shouldn't be taught in science class, but on the other hand, there is a lot of nonsense that is taught in schools, which is of no use to most people anyway. Excuse me for my rather cynical view of the education system. In terms of how this episode handled the situation, most of the satire fell flat for me. It was all very exaggerated, and more importantly, it did not really touch on how this change actually affected characters and their lives. Because of this, it felt like the writers were just giving their arguments to us, instead of actually expressing them in a way which makes sense for the characters. That being said, there were a few moments I did like. The intro of Bart trying to enjoy the last day of summer was very fun, and as I said, the scene where Homer acts up in court was also quite funny. Sure, it may have been a convenient way to end the episode, but it still got a laugh out of me. Overall, this one was okay and had its moments, but if it had expanded on the characters more, as well as the plotline of Lisa teaching a secret class, it probably would have been better. It certainly would have been better than just randomly arresting her out of nowhere. Season 17, Episode 22, Marge and Homer turn a couple play. The Springfield Isotopes star batsman is having marital problems. When he sees Homer and Marge kissing on a jumbotron, he asks them for advice. My trivia here is that the song that plays while a kiss camera shows couples kissing is Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals. The best part of the episode for me was Homer's attempt at being the counselor. The season finale gets a 3 out of 5. This is an episode that I probably should not like, as it does contain some weird moments in what is a very simplistic story. But for what it set out to do, I think it worked reasonably well. It was a simple take on marriage problems, and unlike most other times this show tries that, the Homer and Marge relationship didn't actually hijack the main focus. They had a few arguments, sure, but they felt more natural, and because they never tried to tease them splitting up, it made sure that it never became overdramatic. Now the story is not perfect or anything, as the characters of Buck and Tabitha are a bit bland, but the episode still manages to have some fun with them regardless. They are one-time characters at the end of the day, so I don't really mind them being used as plot devices. The jokes here were also solid enough, and helped to win me around to the episode a bit more. I loved Homer's over-the-top antics in trying to become a marriage counselor, with the way he dresses up and scribbles over one of Lisa's achievement cards to pass it off as a counselor degree. The way in which Bart is totally in awe of Tabitha is also kind of realistic. I mean, sure, Bart is only 10, but still. If most boys that age had a woman like that basically pole dancing in front of them, then let's just say that they would probably feel a certain way about that. So yeah, this is an episode with flaws, but it kind of won me over and ended up being on the high end of a 3. So that is every episode from Season 17 reviewed, and here is a season summary. The overall average score here is 2.82, which is down from last year by quite a bit, and it's actually the second lowest so far. I'll get on to what that means in a minute. The bottom 5 episodes of the season are as follows. The Bonfire of the Manatees was the 5th worst, Millhouse of Sand and Fog was 4th, The Wettest Stories Ever Told was 3rd, Million Dollar AB was 2nd, and Regarding Margie was the worst. In terms of the top 5, My Fair Laddie was 5th, Where on the Road to Nowhere was 4th, The Seemingly Never Ending Story was 3rd, Girls Just Want to Have Sums was 2nd, and in my opinion the best episode of the year was The Girl Who Slept Too Little. Now, as for my overall analysis of this season, I don't really know what to make of it, to be honest. I think this is the hardest one to analyse so far. Parts of it, especially the first half of the season, I would say was just very typical Simpsons storylines. A lot of Homer and Marge marriage stuff that I was kind of getting bored of, etc, etc. The second half of this season though was well and truly all over the place, both in terms of the storylines and the quality of them. I mean, you had Bart getting kidnapped by a chimp, Abe becoming a matador out of nowhere, Burns moving the plan to India, Homer and Marge swapping partners, among many more. Due to how volatile these episodes were, it's not at all surprising that they varied in quality so much. I mean, this season did match Season 11 in having 3 1 out of 5 episodes. And like Season 11, all 3 came in the second half of the season. To this season's credit though, it did also have 2 5 rated episodes, so it was not all bad. In fact, one of the 5s was sandwiched in between 2 1s, which was kind of ridiculous. Overall though, I would say that the bad here outweighed the good, and as such this is a bad season, probably the second worst so far. I would still rank this one above Season 11, as the best bits here were better than the best bits in that season. Also, I felt this season was more adventurous and experimental, which makes me want to cut it a bit more slack. As for the characters here, I think Lisa had the best time of it. The top 2 episodes here both had her involved in a major way, and I just found her to be pretty well characterized throughout. Marge was relegated from last season down to more supporting roles, and even the episodes which did greatly involve her were mostly disappointing. Homer and Bart, meanwhile, kind of summed up the season. They both had their moments, but were very up and down. Unlike most of the recent seasons, in terms of the side characters, there was none which stood out as being unusually prominent, but I would at least give the writers credit for using lots of them, even if it is only usually in one-off episodes. The episodes that we get with Willie and Patty and Selma are prime examples of this. So yeah, that's about all for this one. In my opinion, it is a step down from Season 16, but at least the writers were willing to try new things here. That at least gives me some degree of hope heading into Season 18. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and take care guys.